Rachel, good evening everyone. My presentation actually follows on really neatly from Catherine's. We didn't plan it that way, but it's good. So I'm going to briefly touch on a couple of challenges facing Scotland, so particularly the change in population that we face and the health of our population and the health inequality that Scotland has. And I'm going to say a little bit about the potential mitigating role of place, and my challenge is to try and do all that in about 15 minutes. So Scotland's change in population, as you know, we do have a change in population, so Scotland's population is projected to increase, so the numbers of people living in Scotland is projected to increase. The age profile of the population is expected to change, so as the baby boomers of the 50s and 60s start to age into later life. And of course all of that means that the number of people living in older age is expected to significantly increase in the future years. So of course what that means, it brings very significant challenges to us as a country, particularly around how we deliver health and social care services. And picking up on what Catherine says, I suppose I just wanted to re-emphasise the point that it's important that we start to act now to prepare our population for those changes. It's important, as Catherine said, that we do focus on this life course approach to healthy ageing. And if we wait until people have got older, we've almost missed the boat. So as Catherine said, there's really good evidence now of taking a life course approach is really important. So some additional evidence around ACEs. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. So these are the bad things that happen to you when you're young in childhood. And there's good evidence now that accumulation of these ACEs actually knocks off life as you age. So some really good evidence that what happens to you right across the life course is important in terms of healthy ageing. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge really is around Scotland's health. So this is Scotland's life expectancy going back 150 or so years. The good news, as you can see, is that it's gradually improving, or has been improving systematically. The bad news is that the latest data actually shows that that improvement is actually starting to stop, or indeed decline and slip back. There's more bad news, and I'm guessing you'll all be very familiar with this headline. And unfortunately, unlike most media headlines about Scotland's health, this one's actually true. So if you look at Scotland's health there, compare it to a range of other comparable countries, Western European countries, going back 150 years or so. Scotland now sits very much at the bottom, as you can see here. It's not always been like that, so about 50 or so years ago we were somewhere in the middle. So something's been happening over the last 50 or so years to basically pull us down to the bottom, and I'll maybe touch on that later. Why is Scotland's health so poor is a very common question. The answer to that is very complicated and complex, but essentially it relates to the amount of poverty that we have in Scotland, and in particular the amount of health inequality that we have in Scotland. So Scotland has some of the widest health inequalities in the world, and indeed the widest health inequalities in Western Europe. Health inequalities are basically the unfair and avoidable differences in health outcomes across a range of different groups. So this is Scotland's health for split into deciles, so 10% sections. So you can see the most deprived, 10% of the population, have the worst health outcomes, and the least deprived, the best off in society, have the best health outcomes. And so this is essentially what we mean when we talk about health inequalities. And it's that gradient is, I guess, an important thing, because health inequalities matter to everyone. It's not just about the worst off and the best off. It relates to us all. And it isn't just about length of life. So yes, those most deprived live fewer years. It's also about the quality of life. So as you can see in this orange bit, those most deprived not only have a lower life expectancy, but they live a greater percentage of their life in poorer health. That's health inequalities at a population level, looking across Scotland. So this is 32 local authorities, so the more affluent local authorities on the left enjoying better health outcomes. See Kathy smiling. Glasgow, unfortunately on the right, some of the poorest, most deprived local authorities have some of the worst health outcomes. with Glasgow right down there at the bottom. And even within Glasgow, there's significant inequalities. So this is a range of neighbourhoods within Glasgow, and you can see even within a city fairly small, there's huge variations. So up to 15 years difference in a city in terms of life expectancy. So huge inequalities. And that's led a lot of people, including the BBC, to ask questions like this. So why is Glasgow UK's sickest city? Why is Scotland one of the sickest countries? And that's led to pieces of research like this. This is a fantastic piece of research. I quote it all the time. Apologies if you've seen it before. It was done a couple of years ago, but it is, I think, a fascinating and really interesting piece of research. And essentially what it was looking at is this thing called excess mortality. Basically what that is the additional number of deaths, or additional amount of mortality over and above what we would expect to see. So what the researchers did was looked at Glasgow and compared Glasgow to Liverpool and Manchester. Liverpool and Manchester are very comparable in terms of to Glasgow, so very similar size, similar demographics, similar histories, etc. So you would expect to see similar levels of health in Glasgow as you would to Liverpool and Manchester, because all the things that create poor health are very similar in those cities. And what the researchers actually found was that 30% increase higher premature deaths in Glasgow, 15% higher deaths of all ages. And you can see this particularly on this slide. So this is a range of UK cities. So it's basically wealth, poverty along the x-axis and health along the y-axis. And I guess you can, it shows you what we would expect to see. So the more affluent cities such as York, Cardiff, Edinburgh enjoying the best health outcomes. Liverpool, Manchester, the more deprived cities suffering the worst health outcomes. Glasgow is very similar to Liverpool and Manchester, so you would expect to see Glasgow somewhere about there. When you actually put in Glasgow, you can see it way down there. So this is the thing that they were studying, the excess mortality. So what is the difference between Liverpool and Manchester compared to Glasgow? And it's, again, really complicated and complex that obviously we don't have time to go into today, but it all centres on this issue of vulnerability. So what the authors concluded was that Glasgow, because of what's happened to it as a city over the last 40 or 50 years, have made the population much more vulnerable to the things that cause poor health. So although it suffers or is exposed to the same things that cause poor health, the population is essentially much more vulnerable to those because of these things that have happened over the last 40 or 50 years. And that's relevant to today's presentation because a lot of these things are related to place. So things like Glasgow suffered huge levels of urban displacement, urban change. There was huge amounts of overcrowding in Glasgow. There was the Newtown relocation policy, etc., etc. All these are place-related things. And I suppose the reason why I particularly, or I use this stuff quite a lot, because it demonstrates to me quite clearly what happens to health when we get placemaking wrong. As Catherine mentioned, there's lots of now really good evidence relating place and health. So this is just another piece of evidence I refer to a lot. So this is what was done in Public Health England. So they looked at the relationship between all of these elements of place to health. There's also now some pretty good evidence, again, as Catherine kind of alluded to, of what happens when we have bad environments and the effect that bad environments have on health and indeed healthy ageing. So this was again some very recent research that was done in Scotland, and what they looked at was a range of so-called environmental neighbourhood stresses such as vandalism, litter and rubbish, etc., etc., and they found that they were quite closely associated with biological aging. So they looked at the association between these things and telomeres. So telomeres are the caps, the protective caps at the end of your chromosomes. So basically they protect your body against ageing. And they found a close association between these neighbourhood stresses and length of telomeres. So essentially what they were concluding was if we can find a way of improving our environments, that should help to maintain the telomere length, which indeed will then help improve health. And that's important because not only do we know that those most deprived, as I was saying earlier, have the worst health outcomes, we also know that the most deprived live in the worst environmental conditions. So if we can improve the environmental conditions for these people, we can improve health, which in turn should help reduce health inequalities. So I guess to summarise that little bit, I think the Minister sums it up quite well. So the places where we live, work and play can have a major impact on our health, well-being, sense of identity and prosperity. And I think that quote's important because I think it just demonstrates now that we have made that connection between place and health at the highest levels. So this is a Minister now making this connection through a fairly high-profile policy. So I think that's certainly helped drive now lots of action at a local level. So we're starting to see lots of activity around place and health. So a couple of examples. So I'm sure many of you will have come across this. This is the place standard, something that my organisation is very much involved in. And it's a way of assessing the quality of local places, looking at these 14 themes or dimensions. And it's particularly useful for engaging with local communities around the quality of their local places and spaces, and it can be applied to a whole range of different groups and different age groups. So you can see you can build up profiles for a local place. In this example, so this was done in Lithuania, looking so it got perspective from under 18s, 1864 and over 65. So you get a perspective of how different age groups see their local place. And there's also this issue, or this place principle, that's just starting to emerge, and this is backed by Scottish Government and led by the Improvement Service. And this is really a programme to try and encourage all those working locally around place and spaces to basically work together, plan better for better outcomes. Really important for me and colleagues in public health. So Scotland's public health is going through a significant process of reform at the moment. So we've just identified, or Scotland has identified, 6 national public health priorities. And the first of those priorities, as you can see, is a Scotland where we live in vibrant, healthy and safe places and communities. So again, that just reinforces the link that we in public health absolutely see and recognise the relationship between place and health. And then the final example, I guess, given that we're here, and we've got the launch tomorrow of Scotland's Landscape Alliance. So that's just to give you a sense of there's lots going on the ground around place and health. So really just to summarise, Scotland's facing some pretty significant challenges, as I've talked through. I think creating places, particularly in those areas that suffer the highest levels of deprivation, can help, I think, with those challenges. That is now, I think, widely recognised and accepted, and I think that's starting to drive some action on the ground. Thank you.